I'm a house sitter. It's a quiet life, a transient one. I live in the spaces between other people's memories. 3 weeks ago, I took a job at a sprawling mid-century modern estate in the hills. The owners were a retired couple, traveling through Europe for the winter. The instructions were simple. Water the ferns, collect the mail, and keep the alarm set. The house was beautiful, all glass and cedar, perched on a cliffside. But glass works both ways. In the daylight, it let the forest in. At night, it turned the world into a black mirror. On the third night, I found the guest book on the nightstand in the master bedroom. I figured I should sign it a courtesy for the owners. I opened the leather-bound cover. The last entry was dated from 2 days ago. October 14th, the tea was excellent. I've started sleeping in the closet. The floor is cooler there. The handwriting was shaky, like someone writing with their non-dominant hand. I froze. The owners had been gone for 2 weeks. I was the only person with a key. I turned the page back. October 12th. He's a quiet house sitter. He spends a lot of time on his laptop. I watched him make pasta tonight. He oversalts the water. The air in the bedroom suddenly felt thin. I wasn't reading a guest book. I was reading a log of my own life. I didn't leave. That's the lie we tell ourselves in horror movies, that we just run. But this was a high-tech fortress. The alarm hadn't tripped once. The cameras showed nothing but empty hallways and swaying trees. I convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe the owners had a twisted sense of humor. I went to the kitchen to make tea, partly to calm my nerves, partly to see if the guest was right about my habits. As the kettle began to whistle, I felt a sudden localized drop in temperature. It wasn't a draft. It was like standing next to an open freezer. I looked at the stainless steel backsplash of the stove. In the reflection, I saw the door to the walk-in pantry slowly click shut. I grabbed a heavy iron skillet. I walked to the pantry. I didn't count to 3. I just threw the door open. The pantry was empty. Just rows of canned tomatoes and artisanal crackers. But on the floor, tucked behind a bag of flour, was a small, hand-knitted blanket. It was warm. I reached out to touch it, and my fingers brushed a piece of paper tucked into the folds. I'm hiding in the vents now. You're getting too close. I like the way you smell like cedar and old paper. It reminds me of the house before it was built. I called the owners. I didn't care if I sounded crazy. I reached them in a hotel in Rome. There's someone in the house, I whispered into the phone. I found notes. They're watching me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, the husband spoke, his voice sounding small and far away. We didn't want to tell you, he said. We thought if we didn't acknowledge him, he wouldn't bother you. He was there when we bought the lot. He's the architect. He thinks he's still designing the house. Just ... Just stay out of the closets and don't look into the vents at night. You left me here with a squatter? I hissed. He's not a squatter, the wife chimed in, her voice trembling. He's the foundation. He just wants to see if you fit the floor plan. I hung up. I grabbed my bag and headed for the front door. I punched in the disarm code for the alarm. The keypad beeped, but the light stayed red. Access denied, the electronic voice chirped. I tried again. Access denied. I looked at the digital screen on the wall. The text began to scroll, replaced by that same shaky hand-drawn script. The design is changing. I've decided the house needs an occupant who doesn't leave. I've deleted the exits. I'm writing this on my phone, sitting in the middle of the living room. The glass walls that once looked out over the cliff are gone. Not broken, gone. In their place is solid cedar. The doors have vanished. The wood grain seamless where the frames used to be. The house is shrinking. Every hour, the walls move in. I can hear him now. He's in the walls, humming. I opened the guest book one last time. The final entry was written just seconds ago. October 17th. The house sitter is finally part of the architecture. I've tucked him into the crawl space under the stairs. He fits perfectly. My house is smart. That was my first mistake. I wanted a home that knew me. I wanted the lights to hum to life when I walked into a room, and the thermostat to dip to a cool 68 degrees the moment I tucked myself into bed. I wanted a house that felt alive. I got exactly what I asked for. It started with the welcome home notifications. My phone would buzz at 2 p.m. while I was sitting in my office 10 miles away. Front door unlocked. Welcome home, David. The first time, I panicked. I called the police, thinking a burglar had picked the deadbolt. They found nothing. No forced entry, no missing laptop. The door was locked tight. The security company told me it was a server-side glitch, a digital hiccup. The second time it happened, I checked the smart fridge logs. My fridge has a camera inside. It's supposed to help you see if you're out of milk while you're at the store. I opened the app and scrolled back to 2:05 p.m. The light inside the fridge flickered on. A hand, pale, thin, and tipped with yellowed nails, reached in and took a single slice of cheddar cheese. Then it took a jar of maraschino cherries. The hand didn't belong to a burglar. It was too slow, too comfortable. I didn't call the police this time. I bought a hidden camera and hid it inside a book. I stayed at a hotel that night. I couldn't bear the thought of being under the same roof as that hand. The next morning, I retrieved the SD card. I sat in my car in the driveway, my laptop balanced on my knees, and hit play. The house was silent for hours. Then, at 2:10 p.m., the floorboards in the hallway began to groan. One by one. Creak, creak. Someone was walking with a heavy, deliberate limp. A man entered the frame. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was wearing my clothes. My favorite gray hoodie. My old college sweatpants. He looked like me, but wrong. His skin looked like wet paper stretched over a skull. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and clouded with a thick, milky film. He didn't look for money. He walked over to my armchair. He sat down. He spent 4 hours just sitting there. Occasionally, he would lean forward and sniff the air, his nostrils flaring as if he were trying to catch the scent of my lingering presence. At 6 p.m., my smart lights dimmed automatically for evening mode. The man smiled. It wasn't a human smile. His mouth opened too wide, revealing gums that were the color of bruised plums. He stood up, walked to the hallway mirror, and began to practice. He adjusted his hair to match my cowlick. He practiced my walk. He even picked up a photo of my mother and whispered, "Hey, Mom, just calling to check in my voice. Then he looked directly at the hidden camera. He didn't break it. He leaned in until his milky eye filled the entire screen. "You're late for dinner, David," he whispered. I'm sitting in my car now, watching the front window of my house. The lights in the living room just turned off. Sleep mode has initiated. My phone buzzed. A new notification from the smart lock. 11 p.m. Front door unlocked manually from the inside. The porch light flickered on. The man walked out onto the porch. He was wearing my jacket now. He looked at my car and waved. A friendly, neighborly wave. He's starting the walk I take every night. He's already home. There's a stretch of Highway 41 where the radio goes to die. It's a 20-mile ribbon of cracked asphalt that cuts through the dense, suffocating pine barrens of the northern interior. The GPS spins in circles, lost in a digital fog, and the cell service drops to a single blinking bar before vanishing entirely. Locals call it the blind spot. Most people just turn up their old CDs and drive faster, desperate to see the glow of a gas station again. But if you have an old-school analog TV in your dashboard, or a portable one sitting on the passenger seat, Try tuning it to Channel 21. Don't look for a broadcast. You won't find the news or a late-night movie. You'll find something that shouldn't exist in a world governed by physics. I was driving that stretch last Tuesday at 3 a.m. The silence of the road was starting to feel heavy, like the air inside the cabin was thickening with every mile I traveled. I reached over and clicked on the small, grainy monitor I keep for my archive experiments. At first, it was just the usual snow, white noise, the sound of 1,000 dead bees buzzing inside the glass. It's a hypnotic sound, one that makes the road ahead seem to stretch into infinity. I stared at the screen, my eyes reflecting the flickering gray light, waiting for the signal to catch. I've heard stories about the blind spot, but I never expected the static to talk back. Then the static began to take shape. It didn't turn into a picture. It turned into a room. A basement, maybe. The walls were lined with damp concrete, stained with dark patches that looked like maps of countries that don't exist. A single light bulb swung from a frayed wire in the center of the frame. It was empty, but the seat of a lone wooden chair was still warm enough that the air above it shimmered with heat waves. Someone had just been there. A voice started to leak through the speakers. It wasn't a person talking. It sounded like someone was dragging a heavy violin bow across a sheet of rusted, jagged metal. It was a rhythmic, scraping sound that vibrated in my teeth. Exit 14, the voice grated. It was low, distorted by the interference, but the words were unmistakable. Take exit 14, Marcus. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My name is Marcus, and there is no exit 14 on Highway 41. The exits stop at 12. Everyone knows that. The road simply ends at the county line after that. I looked at the road ahead. The green highway signs were blurred by the rain and the speed, but as I passed the next one, the numbers began to bleed. The 1 and the 2 melted together right before my eyes, reshaping themselves into a 1 and a 4. The white paint looked fresh, like it was still dripping down the metal. I didn't take it. I kept my foot on the gas. The TV screen flickered violently, a strobe light of black and white. It filled the car with a nauseating pulse. The empty chair in the basement wasn't empty anymore. Someone was sitting there, or rather something. It was wearing a suit that looked like it was made of woven shadows, and its face was a smooth, featureless surface of shifting gray static. It didn't have eyes, yet I could feel its gaze burning into the back of my neck. It leaned toward the camera. Its movements were jerky and unnatural. Its mouth opened not a human mouth, but a jagged tear in the screen, and a sound came out that made my ears ring with a sharp, metallic pain. The sound wasn't noise. It was a list. It was a clinical, cold recitation of every turn I had taken for the last hour, every stop I had made, every time I had looked in the mirror. Left at the oak tree, right at the creek, heartbeat ... heartbeat ... skip. The static man stood up. I've lived in this apartment for 6 years. It's a 4th floor. Walk up in a building that's seen better decades. The windows are old. The glass is wavy and distorted, making the world outside look like it's underwater. I liked that. It made the city feel distant, like a movie I could turn off whenever I wanted. But 3 nights ago, the movie started watching me back. It was a Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk, the glow of my monitor the only light in the room. The streetlights outside were flickering, casting long rhythmic shadows across my wall. I happened to glance at the building across the narrow alley. It's an old brick warehouse, mostly used for storage. There are windows, but they've been boarded up for as long as I've lived here, except for one. On the top floor, the 3rd window from the left was open. No boards, no glass, just a dark rectangular hole in the brick. And standing in that hole was a man. He was perfectly still. I couldn't see his face. The shadows were too deep for that. But I could see his silhouette. He was tall, thin, and leaning slightly forward, as if you were trying to hear a conversation happening in my room. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my spine. I turned off my monitor, plunged my room into darkness, and waited. I expected him to move, to duck back into the shadows, or walk away now that I'd noticed him. But he didn't. He stayed there for 3 hours. He didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. He just stared through the wavy glass of my window and into my life. The next night, I told myself it was a mannequin, or maybe a stack of boxes that happened to look like a person in the moonlight. I even laughed about it while I made dinner, but when I sat down at my desk, I couldn't help it. I looked. He was still there, but he wasn't in the window anymore. He was on the fire escape. He had moved 2 floors down and 1 building closer. He was crouching now, his long arms wrapped around the rusted metal railings. The streetlights hit him for a split second. His skin wasn't skin. It was the color of a wet sidewalk, gray and mottled. He wasn't wearing clothes. He looked like he was made of the same shadows he lived in. I closed my blinds and locked the window. I spent the night on the sofa with every light in the apartment turned on. I didn't sleep. Every time the building groaned or the wind rattled the glass, I jumped. I kept thinking about the way he was crouching like a predator, waiting for a signal. I called the police the next morning. I felt like a fool trying to explain it. "There's a gray man on the fire escape," I said. The officer sounded bored. "Probably a squatter kid. We'll send a car when one is free." The car never came. By sunset, the dread had turned into a physical weight in my chest. I kept the blinds shut, but I could feel him. It's a specific sensation, the feeling of being observed. It's like a hum in the air. I decided to leave. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. I reached for the handle, but I stopped. There was a sound coming from the other side. It was a wet, rhythmic, sliding noise, like someone was dragging a heavy piece of meat up the stairs. It stopped right outside my door. I held my breath. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Then came the tap. It wasn't a knock. It was a single sharp tap against the wood, right at the level of my eyes. Tap and a long silence. Then another tap. "I can see the light under the door," a voice whispered. It didn't sound like a person. It sounded like air escaping a punctured lung. "The glass is wavy, David, but I can see you clearly now." My blood turned to slush. He knew my name. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ran to the window and peeled back the edge of the blind. The fire escape was empty. The warehouse window across the alley was boarded up again. For a second, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe he was gone. Maybe I was having a breakdown. But then I looked down. On the glass of my own window, on the outside, there were handprints. Long, thin smears of gray grease. They were fresh. They were still dripping, and they were moving. I watched, paralyzed as a finger traced a circle on the glass from the outside. It didn't make a sound, but the grease left a trail that glowed faintly in the moonlight. I realized he wasn't on the fire escape anymore. He was clinging to the brick right outside my window, 4 stories up. I backed into the kitchen, grabbing a knife, my eyes never leaving the blinds. "The lock is old, David." The voice came from the window now, muffled by the glass. "The wood is soft. I've been watching the rot spread for years. It's almost time for the opening." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I bolted for the door. I didn't care who was in the hallway. I turned the locks, threw the door open, and ran. I didn't look back until I reached the street. I spent the night in my car, parked under a bright street light in a grocery store lot. Every time a person walked by, I flinched. When the sun finally came up, I went to a locksmith. I bought 3 heavy-duty deadbolts and a reinforced chain. I spent the afternoon installing them, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the drill twice. I was turning my apartment into a cage. By evening, I felt a false sense of security. I had the lights on, the doors triple locked, and the blinds reinforced with duct tape. I sat in the middle of the floor, far away from the windows. I tried to watch TV, to focus on anything else, but the hum was getting louder. It wasn't just in the air anymore. It was vibrating in the floorboards, coming from the apartment below. I realized then that the building wasn't empty. It was a hive. I could hear the sliding noise again, but it wasn't in the hallway. It was inside the walls. The sound of gray skin dragging against dry wood. He wasn't trying to get through the door. He was already inside the structure. The architecture is changing, David, the voice whispered, coming from the air vent in the corner. I stood up, my knife held out in front of me, but there was nothing to strike. The walls began to bulge, the wallpaper stretching like skin. I saw the shape of a hand pressed through the plaster, then a face. The gray man wasn't a person. He was a parasite. He lived in the spaces between the rooms, and he had finally decided that my room was the perfect size for his nest. I'm writing this from the fire escape. I went out the window because it was the only exit left, but as I look back through the wavy glass, I see him sitting at my desk. He's turning off my monitor. He's looking at the building across the alley. I realize now he wasn't watching me. He was showing me how to wait. Now I'm the one on the fire escape, and the shadows are starting to feel like skin.